Hey guys, thank you for joining us back here at Old Mom Hubbard's house. We are going to be wrapping up Charlotte's Web today, and then for our next read-along video we'll be ready to start Sounder. Hopefully in between now and then we're probably going to have maybe an activity video, something like that. We're looking at some different things. As I've told you before, we are not a perfect bunch around here. We're just a normal family living life and kind of welcoming you along into our fun little chaotic mess of life. So today we've had several different projects going on. I'm trying to do some reorganizing, and we have some outdoor pillows that are sitting on a couch because I'm working on getting some things done outside. All kinds of fun stuff going on around here. So please, as I kind of show you the crew here as we get started, excuse the little bit of mess here that is above and beyond our normal little mess you see. And I will let you, let the crew say hi to you real quick, and we will jump in here. I am joined today by Julia, who's got pudding on her chin. Isaiah there. Hudson resting. Josephine. Everybody loves to fight over introducing Hudson. I don't know what's up with that. And we have Alexia over here working on her little knitting project while we read. And so we really enjoy getting into a lot of those little things as well. It makes my heart happy. I am not a knitter personally. I crochet. My kids are a little bit of rebels that way. They have dabbled a little bit in crochet. They know a little bit about it, but they enjoy knitting more for some reason right now at least. So we've discussed kind of getting back into different things, but that's part of our fun of having these kind of times, is just to sit down and for me be able to read aloud with the kids, with my bunch, and everybody just have a little time together to relax and work on their own little projects and do their own little thing, while still getting some good reading time in, story time, and some time together. So I hope that you are able to enjoy this as well. I'm not sure exactly. The kids were asking me, is today's video going to be shorter, is today's video going to be longer? And to this point I've just started reading, and we've stopped when we came up to around our half-hour mark. But today we are finishing this book one way or another, and then we're going to be done. So we may run a little bit over our usual time. We may be a little bit under our usual time. I'm not really sure. I haven't read these in advance to time it out. We're just taking it as it comes, and you are along with us for the ride. So whether you are having your own little break and you are like me and you like to get into the classic stories, but maybe you have other things going on, you don't have time to sit down and read it, whether you're sitting and enjoying this with some little ones of your own, or whether you need a break for yourself and you're putting this on for your little ones to enjoy and then going about your business. I am so thankful that we have you here with us. We really appreciate all of you who are tuning in with us, and we will get started. Is everybody ready, guys? Yeah. Okay. We left off at the fairgrounds, and Fern was starting to get excited hanging out with Mr. Henry Fussy, and everyone has had a very exciting day. So now we are going to start with chapter 20, The Hour of Triumph. "Special announcement," said the loudspeaker in a pompous voice. "The management of the fair takes great pleasure in presenting Mr. Homer L. Zuckerman and his famous pig. The truck bearing this extraordinary animal is now approaching the infield. Kindly stand back and give the truck room to proceed. In a few moments, the pig will be unloaded in the special judging ring in front of the grandstand, where a special award will be made. Will the crowd please make way and let the truck pass? Thank you." Wilbur trembled when he heard this speech. He felt happy, but dizzy. The truck crept along slowly in low speed. Crowds of people surrounded it, and Mr. Arble had to drive very carefully in order not to run over anybody. At last he managed to reach the judge's stand. Avery jumped out and lowered the tailgate. "I'm scared to death," whispered Mrs. Zuckerman. "Hundreds of people are looking at us." "Cheer up," replied Mrs. Arble. "This is fun." "Unload your pig, please," said the loudspeaker. "All together now, boys," said Mr. Zuckerman. Several men stepped forward from the crowd to help lift the crate. Avery was the busiest helper of all. "Tuck your shirt in, Avery," cried Mrs. Zuckerman, "and tighten your belt. Your pants are coming down." "Can't you see I'm busy?" replied Avery in disgust. "Look!" cried Fern, pointing. "There's Henry." "Don't shout, Fern," said her mother, "and don't point." "Can't I please have some money?" asked Fern. "Henry invited me to go on the Ferris wheel again, only I don't think he has any money left. He ran out of money." Mrs. Arble opened her handbag. "Here," she said. "Here is 40 cents. Now don't get lost. And be back at our regular meeting place by the pig pen very soon." Fern raced off, ducking and dodging through the crowd in search of Henry. "The Zuckerman pig is now being taken from his crate," boomed the voice of the loudspeaker. "Stand by for an announcement." Templeton crouched under the straw at the bottom of the crate. "What a lot of nonsense," muttered the rat. "What a lot of fuss about nothing." Over in the pig pen, silent and alone, Charlotte rested. Her 2 front legs embraced the egg sack. Charlotte could hear everything that was said on the loudspeaker. The words gave her courage. This was her hour of triumph. As Wilbur came out of the crate, the crowd clapped and cheered. Mr. Zuckerman took off his cap and bowed. Lurvy pulled his big handkerchief from his pocket and wiped the sweat from the back of his neck. Avery knelt in the dirt by Wilbur's side, busily stroking him and showing him off. Mrs. Zuckerman and Mrs. Arble stood on the running board of the truck. "Ladies and gentlemen," said the loudspeaker, "we now present Mr. Homer L. Zuckerman's distinguished pig. The fame of this unique animal has spread to the far corners of the earth, attracting many valuable tourists to our great state. Many of you will recall that never-to-be-forgotten day last summer when the writing appeared mysteriously on the spider's web in Mr. Zuckerman's barn, calling the attention of all and sundry to the fact that this pig was completely out of the ordinary. This miracle has never been fully explained, although learned men have visited the Zuckerman pig pen to study and observe this phenomenon. In the last analysis, we simply know that we are dealing with supernatural forces here, and we should all feel proud and grateful. In the words of the spider's web, ladies and gentlemen, this is some pig." Wilbur blushed. He stood perfectly still and tried to look his best. "This magnificent animal," continued the loudspeaker, "is truly terrific. Look at him, ladies and gentlemen. Notice the smoothness and whiteness of the coat. Observe the spotless skin, the healthy pink glow of ears and snout. "It's the buttermilk," whispered Mrs. Arble to Mrs. Zuckerman. "Note the general radiance of this animal. Then remember the day when the word radiant appeared clearly on the web. Whence came this mysterious writing? Not from the spider, we can rest assured of that. Spiders are very clever at weaving their webs, but needless to say, spiders cannot write." "Oh, they can't they?" murmured Charlotte to herself. "Ladies and gentlemen," continued the loudspeaker, "I must not take any more of your valuable time. On behalf of the governors of the fair, I have the honor of awarding a special prize of $25 to Mr. Zuckerman, together with a handsome bronze medal suitably engraved in token of our appreciation of the part played by this pig, this radiant, this terrific, this humble pig, in attracting so many visitors to our great county fair." Wilbur had been feeling dizzier and dizzier through this long complimentary speech. When he heard the crowd begin to cheer and clap again, he suddenly fainted away. His legs collapsed, his mind went blank, and he fell to the ground unconscious. "What's wrong?" asked the loudspeaker. "What's going on, Zuckerman? What's the trouble with your pig?" Avery was kneeling by Wilbur's head, stroking him. Mr. Zuckerman was dancing about, fanning him with his cap. "He's all right," called Mr. Zuckerman. "He gets these spells. He's modest and can't stand praise." "Well, we can't give a prize to a dead pig," said the loudspeaker. "It's never been done before." "He isn't dead," hollered Zuckerman. "He's fainted. He gets embarrassed easily. Run for some water, Lurvy." Lurvy sprang from the judge's ring and disappeared. Templeton poked his head from the straw. He noticed that the end of Wilbur's tail was within reach. Templeton grinned. "I'll tend to this," he chuckled. He took Wilbur's tail in his mouth and bit it just as hard as he could bite. The pain revived Wilbur. In a flash he was back on his feet. "Ouch!" he screamed. "Hooray!" yelled the crowd. "He's up! The pig is up! Good work, Zuckerman! That's some pig!" Everyone was delighted. Mr. Zuckerman was the most pleased of all. He sighed with relief. Nobody had seen Templeton. The rat had done his work well. And they've got a picture for us here of Wilbur fainted and Templeton biting his tail to wake him up. And now one of the judges climbed into the ring with the prizes. He handed Mr. Zuckerman 2 $10 bills and a $5 bill. Then he tied the medal around Wilbur's neck. Then he shook hands with Mr. Zuckerman while Wilbur blushed. Avery put out his hand and the judge shook hands with him too. The crowd cheered. A photographer took Wilbur's picture. A great feeling of happiness swept over the Zuckermans and the Arbles. This was the greatest moment in Mr. Zuckerman's life. It is deeply satisfying to win a prize in front of a lot of people. As Wilbur was being shoved back into the crate, Lurvy came charging through the crowd carrying a pail of waters. His eyes had a wild look. Without hesitating a second, he dashed the water at Wilbur. In his excitement, he missed his aim and the water splashed all over Mr. Zuckerman and Avery. They got soaking wet. "For goodness sake!" bellowed Mr. Zuckerman. who was really drenched. "What ails you, Lurvy? Can't you see the pig is all right?" "You asked for water," said Lurvy meekly. "I didn't ask for a shower bath," said Mr. Zuckerman. The crowd roared with laughter. Finally, Mr. Zuckerman had to laugh too. And of course, Avery was tickled to find himself so wet, and he immediately started to act like a clown. He pretended he was taking a shower bath. He made faces and danced around and rubbed imaginary soap under his armpits. Then he dried himself with an imaginary towel. Here they have a picture of everybody getting their prizes. Everybody see? Very good. "Avery, stop it!" cried his mother. "Stop showing off." But the crowd loved it. Avery heard nothing but the applause. He liked being a clown in a ring, with everybody watching in front of a grandstand. When he discovered there was still a little water left in the bottom of the pail, he raised the pail high in the air and dumped the water on himself and made faces. The children in the grandstand screamed with appreciation. At last things calmed down. Wilbur was loaded into the truck. Avery was led from the ring by his mother and placed on the seat of the truck to dry off. The truck, driven by Mr. Arble, crawled slowly back to the pig pen. Avery's wet trousers made a big wet spot on the seat. Chapter 21. Last Day. Charlotte and Wilbur were alone. The families had gone to look for Fern. Templeton was asleep. Wilbur lay resting after the excitement and strain of the ceremony. His medal still hung from his neck. By looking out of the corner of his eye, he could see it. "Charlotte," said Wilbur after a while, "why are you so quiet?" "I like to sit still," she said. "I've always been rather quiet." "Yes, but you seem specially so today. Do you feel all right?" "A little tired, perhaps, but I feel peaceful. Your success in the ring this morning was, to a small degree, my success. Your future is assured. You will live. Secure and safe, Wilbur. Nothing can harm you now. These autumn days will shorten and grow cold. The leaves will shake loose from the trees and fall. Christmas will come, then the snows of winter. You will live to enjoy the beauty of the frozen world, for you mean a great deal to Zuckerman, and he will not harm you ever. Winter will pass, the days will lengthen, the ice will melt in the pasture pond. The song sparrow will return and sing. The frogs will awake, the warm wind will blow again. All these sights and sounds and smells will be yours to enjoy, Wilbur. This lovely world, these precious days." Charlotte stopped. A moment later, a tear came to Wilbur's eyes. "Oh, Charlotte," he said, "to think that when I first met you I thought you were cruel and bloodthirsty." When he recovered from his emotion, he spoke again. "Why did you do all this for me?" he asked. "I don't deserve it. I've never done anything for you." "You have been my friend," replied Charlotte. "That in itself is a tremendous thing. I wove my webs for you because I liked you. After all, what is a life anyway? We're born, we live a little while, we die. A spider's life can't help being something of a mess, with all this trapping and eating flies. By helping you, perhaps I was trying to lift up my life a trifle. Heaven knows anyone's life can stand a little of that." "Well," said Wilbur, "I'm no good at making speeches. I haven't got your gift for words, but you have saved me, Charlotte, and I would gladly give my life for you. I really would. I'm sure you would, and I thank you for your generous sentiments. Charlotte, said Wilbur, we're all going home today. The fair is almost over. Won't it be wonderful to be back home in the barn cellar again, with the sheep and the geese? Aren't you anxious to get home? For a moment Charlotte said nothing. Then she spoke in a voice so low Wilbur could hardly hear the words. I will not be going back to the barn, she said. Wilbur leapt to his feet. Not going back, he cried. Charlotte, what are you talking about? I'm done for, she replied. In a day or two, I'll be dead. I haven't even strength enough to climb down into the crate. I doubt if I have enough silk in my spinets to lower me to the ground. Hearing this, Wilbur threw himself down in an agony of pain and sorrow. Great sobs racked his body. He heaved and grunted with desolation. Charlotte, he moaned. Charlotte, my true friend. Come now, let's not make a scene, said the spider. Be quiet, Wilbur. Stop thrashing about. But I can't stand it, shouted Wilbur. I won't leave you here alone to die. If you're going to stay here, I shall stay too. Don't be ridiculous, said Charlotte. You can't stay here. Zuckerman and Lurvy and John Arbel and the others will be back any minute now, and they'll shove you into that crate and away you'll go. Besides, it wouldn't make any sense for you to stay. There would be no one to feed you. The fairgrounds will soon be empty and deserted. Wilbur was in a panic. He raced round and round the pen. Suddenly, he had an idea. He thought of the egg sack and the 514 little spiders that would hatch in the spring. If Charlotte herself was unable to go home to the barn, at least he must take her children along. Wilbur rushed to the front of his pen. He put his feet up on the top board and gazed around. In the distance, he saw the Arbels and the Zuckermans approaching. He knew he would have to act quickly. Where's Templeton? He demanded. He's in that corner, under the straw, asleep, said Charlotte. Wilbur rushed over, pushed his strong snout under the rat, and tossed him in the air. Templeton! Screamed Wilbur. Pay attention! The rat, surprised out of a sound sleep, looked first dazed, then disgusted. What kind of monkey shine is this? He growled. Can't a rat catch a wink of sleep without being rudely popped into the air? Listen to me, cried Wilbur. Charlotte is very ill. She has only a short time to live. She cannot accompany us home because of her condition. Therefore, it is absolutely necessary that I take her egg sack with me. I can't reach it. I can't climb. You are the only one who can get it. There is not a second to be lost. The people are coming. They'll be here in no time. Please, 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 Templeton, climb up and get the egg sack. The rat yawned. He straightened his whiskers. Then he looked up at the egg sack. So, he said in disgust, it's old Templeton to the rescue again, is it? Templeton, do this. Templeton, do that. Templeton, please run down to the dump and get me a magazine clipping. Templeton, please lend me a piece of string so I can spin a web. Oh, hurry, said Wilbur. Hurry up, Templeton. But the rat was in no hurry. He began imitating Wilbur's voice. So it's, hurry up, Templeton, is it? He said. Ho, ho, and what thanks do I ever get for these services, I would like to know? Never a kind word for old Templeton, only abuse and wisecracks and side remarks. Never a kind word for a rat. Templeton, said Wilbur in desperation. If you don't stop talking and get busy, all will be lost and I will die of a broken heart. Please climb up. Templeton lay back in the straw. Lazily, he placed his forepaws behind his head and crossed his knees in an attitude of complete relaxation. Die of a broken heart, he mimicked. How touching. My. I notice that it's always me you come to when in trouble, but I've never heard of anyone's heart breaking on my account. Oh, no. Who cares anything about old Templeton? Get up, screamed Wilbur. Stop acting like a child. Templeton grinned and lay still. Who made trip after trip to the dump? He asked. Why, it was old Templeton. Who saved Charlotte's life by scaring that Arble boy away with a rotten goose egg? Bless my soul, I believe it was old Templeton. Who bit your tail and got you back on your feet this morning after you fainted in front of the crowd? Old Templeton. Has it ever occurred to you that I'm sick of running errands and doing favors? What do you think I am, anyway? A rat of all work? Wilbur was desperate. The people were coming, and the rat was failing him. Suddenly, he remembered Templeton's fondness for food. Templeton, he said, I will make you a solemn promise. Get Charlotte's egg sack for me, and from now on, I will let you eat first when Lurvy slaps me. I will let you have your choice of everything in the trough, and I won't touch a thing until you're through. The rat sat up. You mean that? He said. I promise. I cross my heart. All right, it's a deal, said the rat. He walked to the wall and started to climb. His stomach was still swollen from last night's gorge. Groaning and complaining, he pulled himself slowly to the ceiling. He crept along till he reached the egg sack. Charlotte moved aside for him. She was dying, but she still had strength enough to move a little. Then Templeton bared his long, ugly teeth and began snipping the threads that fastened the sack to the ceiling. Wilbur watched from below. I've got a picture here for us of Templeton getting the egg sack. Use extreme care, he said. I don't want a single one of those eggs harmed. This stuff sticks in my mouth, complained the rat. It's worse than caramel candy. But Templeton worked away at his job and managed to cut the sack adrift and carry it to the ground, where he dropped it in front of Wilbur. Wilbur heaved a great sigh of relief. Thank you, Templeton, he said. I will never forget this as long as I live. Neither will I, said the rat, picking his teeth. I feel as though I'd eaten a spool of thread. Well, home we go. Templeton crept into the crate and buried himself in the straw. He got out of sight just in time. Lurvy and John Arble and Mr. Zuckerman came along at that moment, followed by Mrs. Arble and Mrs. Zuckerman, and Avery and Fern. Wilbur had already decided how he would carry the egg sack. There was only one way possible. He carefully took the little bundle in his mouth and held it there on top of his tongue. He remembered what Charlotte had told him, that the sack was waterproof and strong. It felt funny on his tongue and made him drool a bit, and of course he couldn't say anything. But as he was being shoved into the crate, he looked up at Charlotte and gave her a wink. She knew he was saying goodbye in the only way he could, and she knew her children were safe. Goodbye, she whispered. Then she summoned all her strength and waved one of her front legs at him. She never moved again. Next day, as the Ferris wheel was being taken apart and the race horses were being loaded into vans and the entertainers were packing up their belongings and driving away in their trailers, Charlotte died. The fairgrounds were soon deserted. The sheds and buildings were empty and forlorn. The infield was littered with bottles and trash. Nobody of the hundreds of people that had visited the fair knew that a gray spider had played the most important part of all. No one was with her when she died. Chapter 22, A Warm Wind. And so Wilbur came home to his beloved manure pile in the barn cellar. His was a strange homecoming. Around his neck he wore a medal of honor. In his mouth he held a sack of spider's eggs. There is no place like home, Wilbur thought, as he placed Charlotte's 514 unborn children carefully in a safe corner. The barn smelled good. His friends, the sheep and the geese, were glad to see him back. The geese gave him a noisy welcome. Congratulations, they cried. Nice work. Mr. Zuckerman took the medal from Wilbur's neck and hung it on a nail over the pig pen where visitors could examine it. Wilbur himself could look at it whenever he wanted to. In the days that followed, he was very happy. He grew to a great size. He no longer worried about being killed, for he knew that Mr. Zuckerman would keep him as long as he lived. Wilbur often thought of Charlotte. A few strands of her old web still hung to the doorway. Every day Wilbur would stand and look at the torn, empty web, and a lump would come to his throat. No one had ever had such a friend, so affectionate, so loyal, so skillful. The autumn days grew shorter. Lurvy brought the squashes and pumpkins in from the garden and piled them on the barn floor, where they wouldn't get nipped on frosty nights. The maples and birches turned bright colors, and the wind shook them, and they dropped their leaves one by one to the ground. Under the wild apple trees in the pasture, little red apples lay thick on the ground, and the sheep gnawed them, and the geese gnawed them, and the foxes came in the night and sniffed them. One evening, just before Christmas, snow began falling. It covered the house and barn and fields and woods. Wilbur had never seen snow before. When morning came, he went out and plowed the drifts in his yard for the fun of it. Fern and Avery arrived, dragging a sled. They coasted down the lane and out into the frozen pond in the pasture. "Coasting is the most fun there is," said Avery. "The most fun there is," retorted Fern, "is when the Ferris wheel stops and Henry and I are in the top car, and Henry makes the car swing, and we can see everything for miles and miles and miles." "Goodness, are you still thinking about that old Ferris wheel?" said Avery in disgust. "The fair was weeks and weeks ago." "I think about it all the time," said Fern, picking snow from her ear. After Christmas, the thermometer dropped to 10 below zero. Cold settled on the world. The pasture was bleak and frozen. The cows stayed in the barn all the time now, except on sunny mornings when they went out and stood in the barnyard in the lee of the straw pile. The sheep stayed near the barn too, for protection. When they were thirsty, they ate snow. The geese hung around the barnyard the way boys hang around a drugstore, and Mr. Zuckerman fed them corn and turnips to keep them cheerful. "Many, many, many thanks," they always said when they saw food coming. Templeton moved indoors when winter came. His ratty home under the pig trough was too chilly, so he fixed himself a cozy nest in the barn behind the grain bins. He lined it with bits of dirty newspapers and rags, and whenever he found a trinket or a keepsake, he carried it home and stored it there. He continued to visit Wilbur 3 times a day, exactly at mealtime, and Wilbur kept the promise he had made. Wilbur let the rat eat first. Then, when Templeton couldn't hold another mouthful, Wilbur would eat. As a result of overeating, Templeton grew bigger and fatter than any rat you ever saw. He was gigantic. He was as big as a young woodchuck. The old sheep spoke to him about his size one day. "You would live longer," said the old sheep, if you ate less. Who wants to live forever? Sneered the rat. I ain't naturally a heavy eater. Or I am naturally a heavy eater, and I get untold satisfaction from the pleasures of the feast. He patted his stomach, grinned at the sheep, and crept upstairs to lie down. All winter, Wilbur watched over Charlotte's egg sack as though he were guarding his own children. Here we have a picture of Templeton growing bigger and bigger. So Wilbur was watching over Charlotte's children. He had scooped out a special place in the manure for the sack next to the board fence. On very cold nights, he lay so that his breath would warm it. For Wilbur, nothing in life was so important as this small, round object. Nothing else mattered. Patiently, he awaited the end of winter and the coming of the little spiders. Life is always a rich and steady time when you are waiting for something to happen or to hatch. The winter ended at last. I heard the frogs today, said the old sheep one evening. Listen, you can hear them now. Wilbur stood still and cocked his ears. From the pond, in shrill chorus, came the voices of hundreds of little frogs. Springtime, said the old sheep thoughtfully. Another spring. As she walked away, Wilbur saw a new lamb following her. It was only a few hours old. The snows melted and ran away. The streams and ditches bubbled and chattered with rushing water. A sparrow with a streaky breast arrived and sang. The light strengthened. The mornings came sooner. Almost every morning there was another new lamb in the sheepfold. The goose was sitting on 9 eggs. The sky seemed wider, and a warm wind blew. The last remaining strands of Charlotte's old web floated away and vanished. One fine sunny morning, after breakfast, Wilbur stood watching his precious sack. He wasn't thinking of anything much. As he stood there, though, he noticed something move. He stepped closer and stared. A tiny spider crawled from the sack. It was no bigger than a grain of sand, no bigger than the head of a pin. Its body was gray, with a black stripe underneath. Its legs were gray and tan. It looked just like Charlotte. Wilbur trembled all over when he saw it. The little spider waved at him. Then Wilbur looked more closely. 2 more little spiders crawled out and waved. They climbed round and round on the sack, exploring their new world. Then 3 more little spiders. Then 8, then 10. Charlotte's children were here at last. Wilbur's heart pounded. He began to squeal. Then he raced in circles, kicking manure into the air. Then he turned a backflip. Then he planted his front feet and came to a stop in front of Charlotte's children. "Hello there," he said. The first spider said hello, but its voice was so small Wilbur couldn't hear it. "I am an old friend of your mother's," said Wilbur. "I'm glad to see you. Are you all right? Is everything all right?" The little spiders waved their forelegs at him. Wilbur could see by the way they acted that they were glad to see him. "Is there anything I can get you? Is there anything you need?" The young spiders just waved. For several days and several nights they crawled here and there, up and down, around and about, waving at Wilbur, trailing tiny drag lines behind them, and exploring their home. There were dozens and dozens of them. Wilbur couldn't count them, but he knew that he had a great many new friends. They grew quite rapidly. Soon each was as big as a BB shot. They made tiny webs near the sack. Then came a quiet morning when Mr. Zuckerman opened a door on the north side. A warm draft of rising air blew softly through the barn cellar. The air smelled of damp earth, of the spruce woods, of the sweet springtime. The baby spiders felt the warm updraft. One spider climbed to the top of the fence. Then it did something that came as a great surprise to Wilbur. The spider stood on its head, pointed its spinnerets in the air, and let loose a cloud of fine silk. The silk formed a balloon. As Wilbur watched, the spider let go of the fence and rose into the air. "Goodbye," it said as it sailed through the doorway. "Wait a minute," screamed Wilbur. "Where do you think you're going?" But the spider was already out of sight. Then another baby spider crawled to the top of the fence, stood on its head, made a balloon, and sailed away. Then another spider, then another. The air was soon filled with tiny balloons, each balloon carrying a spider. Wilbur was frantic. Charlotte's babies were disappearing at a great rate. Here we see a picture of them floating away. "Come back, children," he cried. "Goodbye," they called. "Goodbye, goodbye." At last, one little spider took enough time to stop and talk to Wilbur before making its balloon. "We are leaving here on the warm updraft. This is our moment for setting forth. We are aeronauts, and we are going into the world to make webs for ourselves." "But where?" asked Wilbur. "Wherever the wind takes us. High, low, near, far, east, west, north, south. We take to the breeze. We go as we please." "Are all of you going?" asked Wilbur. "You can't all go. I would be left alone with no friends. Your mother wouldn't want that to happen, I'm sure." The air was now so full of balloonists that the barn cellar looked almost as though a mist had gathered. Balloons by the dozen were rising, circling, drifting away through the door, sailing off on the gentle wind. Cries of "Goodbye, goodbye, goodbye" came weakly to Wilbur's ears. He couldn't bear to watch any more. In sorrow he sank to the ground and closed his eyes. This seemed like the end of the world, to be deserted by Charlotte's children. Wilbur cried himself to sleep. When he woke, it was late afternoon. He looked at the egg sack. It was empty. He looked into the air. The balloonists were gone. Then he walked drearily to the doorway, where Charlotte's web used to be. He was standing there, thinking of her, when he heard a small voice. "Salutations," it said. "I'm up here." "So am I," said another tiny voice. "So am I," said a third voice. "Three of us are staying. We like this place, and we like you." Wilbur looked up. At the top of the doorway, 3 small webs were being constructed. On each web, working busily, was one of Charlotte's daughters. Let me see here them working away on their webs. "Can I take this to mean," asked Wilbur, "that you have definitely decided to live here in the barn cellar, and that I am going to have 3 friends?" "You can indeed," said the spiders. "What are your names, please?" asked Wilbur, trembling with joy. "I'll tell you my name," replied the first little spider, "if you'll tell me why you are trembling." "I'm trembling with joy," said Wilbur. "Then my name is Joy," said the first spider. "What was my mother's middle initial?" asked the second spider. "A," said Wilbur. "Then my name is Ariana," said the spider. "How about me?" asked the third spider. "Will you just pick out a nice, sensible name for me? Something not too long, not too fancy, and not too dumb." Wilbur thought hard. "Nellie?" he suggested. "Fine, I like that very much," said the third spider. "You may call me Nellie." She daintily fastened her orb line to the next spoke of the web. Wilbur's heart brimmed with happiness. He felt that he should make a short speech on this very important occasion. "Joy, Ariana, "Nellie," he began, "welcome to the barn cellar. You have chosen a hollow doorway from which to string your webs. I think it is only fair to tell you that I was devoted to your mother. I owe my very life to her. She was brilliant, beautiful, and loyal to the end. I shall always treasure her memory. To you, her daughters, I pledge my friendship forever and ever." "I pledge mine," said Joy. "I do too," said Erana. "And so do I," said Nellie, who had just managed to catch a small gnat. It was a happy day for Wilbur, and many more happy, tranquil days followed. As time went on, and the months and years came and went, he was never without friends. Fern did not come regularly to the barn any more. She was growing up, and was careful to avoid childish things, like sitting on a milk stool near a pig pen. But Charlotte's children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, year after year, lived in the doorway. Each spring there were new little spiders hatching out to take the place of the old. Most of them sailed away on their balloons, but always 2 or 3 stayed and set up housekeeping in the doorway. Mr. Zuckerman took fine care of Wilbur all the rest of his days, and the pig was often visited by friends and admirers, for nobody ever forgot the year of his triumph and the miracle of the web. Life in the barn was very good. Night and day, winter and summer, spring and fall, dull days and bright days. It was the best place to be, thought Wilbur. This warm, delicious cellar, with the garrulous geese, the changing seasons, the heat of the sun, the passage of the swallows, the nearness of rats, the sameness of sheep, the love of spiders, the smell of manure, and the glory of everything. Wilbur never forgot Charlotte. Although he loved her children and grandchildren dearly, none of the new spiders ever quite took her place in his heart. She was in a class by herself. It was not it is not often that someone comes along who is a true friend and a good writer. Charlotte was both. The end. You'll have to excuse me a little bit there. I had a couple words I'm not sure I pronounced correctly, especially that one spider's name. So I apologize for the little changing of pronunciation there. But I hope you guys have enjoyed reading or listening along with us as we read Charlotte's Web here by E.B. White. It's an old classic that we really enjoyed. I enjoyed reading it. You guys enjoy listening with along with our crowd here on YouTube. So we've had a good time, and we have gone a little longer than most of our videos, but I'm so glad that we have been able to enjoy this with all of you. Thank you for joining us on this little journey, and I hope you will hit the like and subscribe buttons below, leave us some comments, whatever, all that good stuff. Follow along with us. We're going to have some fun. We're taking it as it comes, but we look forward to maybe having, hopefully, an activity or something coming up soon, and starting either at the end of the week or next week, we're going to jump in and start Sounder. So thank you all, and have a good evening.